I've been pretty fortunate since I've gotten to Alaska in that most of the things that I wanted in my first year here worked out for me. When I first arrived, I found a place to stay in Valdez in under 1 hour so that I could live in the snowiest city in the US for one winter. My next goal was to stay in Fairbanks for 2 to 5 months while I searched for a cabin in the interior, but that didn't work out quite as well. I did find a place in Fairbanks to stay, but one week before I was scheduled to be there, the person I was renting from called me and informed me that the place was no longer available. There wasn't a reason, and I didn't ask questions. My first thought was, I have to find another place in the next 6 days. But after calling everything I could find in Fairbanks and not finding anything available that I could afford, with 4 days left, I decided I had no choice but to move to Anchorage because there would be more places there that were less expensive that I could stay. I've already expressed in several videos how much I disliked Anchorage, but I did have success reaching my third goal while there, which was to buy a four-door truck. It's a little older than I was hoping for, but after seeing the prices for trucks in Anchorage, I quickly realized I was very lucky, and that made me happy with what I got. The fourth and final goal I had for my first year in Alaska was to find a cabin in the interior around Denali National Park. I knew this was going to be a difficult goal to accomplish because I was already aware that there were not a lot of cabins to rent in this area, and most of them were either summer cabins that were only rented to tourists or winter cabins that were taken very quickly by the locals. But 4 years previously, when I wasn't entirely sure where I would be renting a cabin in Alaska, I joined several Facebook groups and made some contacts with several people from each group who were renting cabins back in 2019, in case I wound up moving to their area. And while in Anchorage, I contacted a few of them in the Denali borough, and of the 15 contacts that I had, only 3 of them were still renting cabins. 2 of them were out of my price range, but I was able to afford the one that I eventually moved into in the middle of the forest for my previous videos. And I really enjoyed that cabin. It was exactly the type of cabin I had been dreaming of moving into since 2012. So I wound up reaching 3 of my 4 goals for my first year in Alaska. And because I realize you never get everything that you want, I feel like I got a lot more than I actually expected. So why did I decide to leave that perfect cabin after only 2.5 months and move into something I've never really had a lot of interest in, which is a tiny house? Well, it wasn't really by choice. The summer cabin was one of the rare ones in which the owner rented to locals instead of tourists. And like all of the summer cabins, it isn't winter insulated. It started getting a bit chilly in the cabin around late August when evening temperatures dropped down into the mid 30s. But knowing I only had 3 more weeks left there, I decided just to enjoy the remaining time instead of complaining that my nose was cold every night when I was going to sleep. Finding a winter cabin was near impossible, as the majority of the cabins here are summer cabins not built to keep the winter cold out. I wound up finding only one winter cabin and this tiny house, and since I wanted to be a bit closer to the grocery store during the winter when the streets would be covered in ice and snow, I opted to take the tiny house as it's only 1.5 miles from the center of town compared to the winter cabin I found, which was about 9 miles from the grocery store. Another advantage with the tiny house was that I would receive a 1 year lease, which I also would have the option to extend it to 2 years. The problem with renting the cabins in this area is that most of the people living in cabins move every September and April back and forth from a winter cabin to a summer cabin. And it's hard to get settled down and comfortable when you know you're moving again in just a few months. If I like living in the tiny house, I'll most likely stay longer. But if I don't enjoy it, then I may be moving back into a cabin in 1 year. I made this video right when I moved into the tiny house at the end of September 2024, so I have no opinions on it yet. But in the next few weeks, I will share with everyone what it's like living in the tiny house compared to the cabin.